All right, in this module, we're going to start talking about conditional statements. All right, conditional statements, usually in order to do conditions, you want to compare and take different paths in your program. You need to compare things sometimes. And the way that you compare things is by using expressions. So the different operators that can be used for expressions are less than, greater than, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, or does not equal to. So the way that this works is you make an expression, and in the language C, if the expression evaluates to true, then you will use a condition to do something based on that evaluation. But first, let's start and see how expressions work. So say, for example, you have two integers, x and y. So you could prompt and get values for x and y. So you would do that by using printf and scanf, enter a value for x and enter a value for y. And then if you wanted to compare x against y, you have different ways in which you could do it. You could compare to see if x is less than y, or you could compare to see if x is equal to y, or you could compare to see if x does not equal y, for example. Now this is not really code right here because what I'm just writing here are expressions. So these are expressions, and the way that our expressions are used in the language C is they are put into conditions. And the most straightforward way to make a condition is to use the keyword if. So what I'm doing here is I'm writing a condition. I'm saying if x is less than y. So if x is less than y, then I might want to do something based on x being less than y. And of course, I'm putting this in comment because I don't know what I want to do. This lecture right here is not talking about full code. It's just talking about the concept of what an expression is and how to compare things in the language C. I could also compare if x is equal to y. So keep in mind here that you can see, and sometimes the way that you read that, you would read that as equals, just to remind you that you need to put two equal sign in order to compare two things. Or you could also say if x does not equal y. So that's pretty straightforward. You use these expressions to compare things, and it changes the way that your code is going to flow based on different things that you want to do. So here we could do some other examples. So we can do an example that's a little more, it's got a little more going on. So let me pick a blue pen color here, and I'll write like a little program here. Just assume that I'm inside of my main function. So I'm here in my main function. And we can do some comparisons maybe with a variable called age. So I have a variable called age, and I'm going to prompt and get a value from the user. So the user is going to give me a value for this variable age. So I can do some comparisons. I can say if age is greater than or equal to 13, for example, then now what you can do is if you only want to do one thing based on the fact that age being greater than or equal to 13, you don't have to make a block of code. But if you want to do more than one thing based on age being greater than or equal to 13, then you have to make it into a block of code. I always suggest that students always make it into a block of code because that way you will be sure that you know where your statements belong. So I'm comparing here, making a block of code, and if age is greater than or equal to 13, I'm going to go inside of this block of code and do something. So I could print something onto the screen like teenager, or I could do some math based on age being greater than 13. I could call a function based on age being greater than or equal to 13. I can do whatever I want. I could also say if age is greater than or equal to 18, I could do printf adult. Now it's not even possible to do all kinds of combinations that you can do based on, with conditions. The best way to do it is to think about what you want to do, and then using these tools that you are, the tools from the language, you try to solve the problem the best way that you can. All right, so compound statements. I just showed you what a compound statement is. And you've already been making compound statements. Compound statements are a bunch of statements that belong together, and they go inside of an opening curly brace and a closing curly brace. So we make blocks of code when we are making function definitions. We make blocks of code also when we are doing conditions. All right, an expression is what I just showed you a few minutes ago. Expression is what you're comparing. So if, for example, you are comparing two things, you compare them by using an expression. So you could say, like we did before, age less than 50, for example. That right there is the expression. Now, if I put it in with an if and put it in parentheses, then it becomes a condition. So you use conditions, you use expressions to formulate your conditions. And in the language C, if this happens to be false, it will evaluate to a 0 if it's false. If it's true, they usually use 1 for the true value, but anything non-zero in the language C is actually true. All right, another way that you can compare things is by having multiple expressions and using logical ands and logical ors. So logical and works like this. When you are making an expression, you make a compound expression, and that is comparing more than one thing. So this is an expression, n greater than or equal to 0. This is an expression, and the whole thing together is a logical and expression. This is a logical and. And the way that you would use that is if you had a condition like if, and you put this in parentheses, in order for the entire expression to be true, this side must be true, and this side must be true. So what this would include would be any value, assume that n has a value, from 0 up to 100 and including 0 and 100. A logical OR works a little bit differently. A logical OR, which is on your keyboard, it is shift backslash. So this is the backslash, and this is the symbol you use for a logical OR. For a logical OR, for the entire expression of a logical OR to be true, we are comparing this one and we are comparing this one. In order for the entire expression to be true, either this could be true or this could be true. So they could both be true, or only one of them could be true. If this is true and this is false, this whole expression would still be true. The whole thing would still evaluate to true if one is true and the other is false, or if this is false and this is true. So the only way for this entire expression to evaluate to false would be for both sides to be false. In addition, you're not limited on both sides of your logical and by using the same variable on both sides. For example, here we're comparing the variable n, where down here you're just comparing a variable salary and you're comparing a variable dependence. So this is saying that if either the salary is less than the minimum salary or dependents are greater than 5, then this entire expression would evaluate to true, usually used in an if condition as well, or an else if, which we haven't gotten to yet. All right, so here is how you use an if else. So if you take a look at this, this has two selections for the control structure. So this is saying if your heart rate is greater than, your resting heart rate is greater than 56, you want to print this message, keep up your exercise program. Whoops. All right, so the way if else works, and we'll go back here for a minute. The way if else works is that if is going to include whatever you're testing, and else is going to include everything else. So if you use an if-else situation, you don't need to put any condition here on the else, because else is going to include any heart rate, any resting heart rate that is not greater than 56. Okay, do you understand? So you could say if age is greater than or equal to 13, then you want to do something, and then else you want to do something else. So if age is greater than or equal to 13, that's going to include the age 13 and everything above it. Else is going to capture everything else. So there really isn't, you don't need to put, which students always want to do, that you don't need to put else age less than 13, because clearly if it's everything else is going to take care of that. Okay, so here is important to point out that you don't, every time you have an if, you don't also have to have an else. You can just have an if. You can say if x does not equal 0, or if age equals 10, or you're not always required every single time that you have an if, you are not always required to have an else. All right, so let's just do a couple of examples. So I could have a variable here called, we'll do some with a variable called age again. Doesn't really matter. So we could prompt and get the age from the user. All right, so I could test on that age. I could say if age is greater than or equal to 13 and age is less than or equal to 19, then that I could printf teenager, just for example. Else printf not a teenager. So the if is going to include everything that is in this expression. So we get an age. If the user were, and the best way to test conditions is to try things out. Like, what if the age was 15? So the age is 15 is going to fit in here. What if the age is 20? 20 is not going to fit in here, so it's going to go into else. Now I could also have a variable called age, and I only care about one thing. So I prompt and get the age. And maybe I just want to say if age equals 21, then I want to print a message. Printf, let's go to Vegas. Printf, some other message, you are 21. And say, for example, that's all I cared about. All I cared about is an age that is 21, and I don't care about anything else. Now, if you notice here, I do have compound statements here. I'm doing more than one thing inside of my condition. And in the next video, we will go through some code and take a look at code, which will make it easier to read and hopefully easier to understand. So let's just talk a little bit now about multiple selections. So what you can do in C is, and we'll do more in the next video, but you can do if-else, a whole series of if-else ifs. So let's just say, for example, we have a character that is a a grade. So we get the character from the user, and we're going to change it to lowercase using the toLower function. So now we can compare. We could say if grade equals A, we can do something. Else if grade equals C, we can do something else. So I don't have enough space to write it all out, but if grade equals A, you could printf excellent. If grade equals C, you could printf average. Else you could printf grade is not A or C. And again, this is a ridiculous kind of program, but this is just showing you how you can do if, else if, else if, else if. And if you do that, if you have a whole bunch of selections, you should always end with the last else. So we could do a whole bunch if grade equals A, else if grade equals B, else if grade equals C. I just don't have enough space to put that. So this is an introduction to expressions in C, comparisons in C, and how to use if and else if.